Welcome back for lesson 9. In this lesson, we're going to go over duplicating and rotating objects. However, I'm going to go over rotating objects first. I have my object here, and you will notice this little green dot. That is a handle to rotate your object. And I can rotate it by grabbing and moving my cursor. Now, along with that, you will notice a crosshair. This is actually your pivot point. So if I move my pivot point, my rotation, actually becomes the center of my rotation. So my rotation becomes different. It rotates around that pivot point. Now actually, what I'm going to go into next is duplicating copies. You can find that command here on your toolbar. But I'm going to skip down to rotating copies. So if I rotate one copy of my object, it's rotated it in the center. I can change that rotation point the same way I would with just a regular rotation, and I can choose multiple copies to rotate. And notice they're all rotating around that center point that we relocated. Next, we're going to talk about duplicating objects. Now, remember here when it said rotate one object, but actually two appeared? This kind of throws me off. When I duplicate and I multiple objects, it says like duplicate a row of 3, which it's not going to give me 3 duplications, it'll give me 2 for a total row of 3. And notice there's no spacing between these because the bounding box of this shape has no spacing. However, if you notice the R, the bounding box is spread out quite big. So if I go to duplicate multiples there, I'm going to get spacing in between. And so they're not going to be touching edge to edge of the actual object, but of the bounding box. And let me just undo all that. Now I can duplicate in rows or in columns. 3 or 4 is my options. I can create more by using advanced settings, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. Up here is just your single duplications. You can duplicate to the left or the right, and it's the exact same object, it's just placed differently. Now if I wanted to fill the entire work page with my object, I can select my object and go fill page. Notice on the fill page there is spacing between the objects, unlike just duplicating rows. Now because this has so much spacing in its bounding box, when I go to fill the page, it's really not going to give me much. So, be aware of your bounding box when you use these options. Okay, let's go into the advanced options of duplicating. I am going to open that up, and I'll scroll down. Now, remember I said we can choose to do more than the 3 or 4 that was standard in this options. Well, that's where we're going to do this, in the advanced options. So I can choose 10 copies of something, and I can say duplicate them to the left, and then it'll give me 10 copies. So if I wanted to replicate this object and put spacing in between, I have to take into consideration the size of this object. This object is 2 inches, so if I wanted to do 3 replications of this object and I wanted to put spacing of 1/4 of an inch between it, I would have to change my offset to 2.25. 2 for the object into 5 for the space. And then I would hit my replicate. And that's done both horizontally, or I can choose to do it vertically. And I need to change this back to 0. And that would do that vertically. Now if I left horizontal and vertical replication, it's going to put it at a diagonal, if I remember right. Yes. Okay. Or instead of doing that, if I wanted to, I could also replicate it at an angle or rotation of each copy here if I want to change the rotation. And remember, it's going to rotate around this crosshair. So when I go to replicate, they're rotated there. Or I can move this crosshair and change where it replicates and replicate it there. And that is the basics of duplicating and rotating your objects. Hope to see you for lesson 10. Thanks.